Good afternoon. I want to first say thank you to Craft in America for having me. It's awesome to get to come down to LA. I'm a Northern California kid, so it's nice to get to be back in my state after jumping around from school to school. And if you're filling out your craft bingo card, I've hit 4 out of the 5. I'm getting close. Pilchuck's a little bit trickier. It's glass. I haven't done anything with glass very much. So thank you guys for coming out. So my talk today is going to be about my work and kind of the two different ideas that I think, the two very small ideas that I think have been playing a part in my body of work for a very long time. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the craft schools that I've been to and kind of how they've affected me during that time. Especially with the residency like Penland, where you're there for 3 years, you definitely have a deep draw into like who comes up there. Some of the faces in here I've seen there, so it's really funny how then that kind of channel goes back out into the world, and you get to kind of share it some more. Okay, so there and there is like this kind of weird thing that when I was in first grade was a challenge that I could not get these two right, and I feel like I'm 30 now. At 30 years old, I finally figured it out, but I think it's been this like thing that ties up two very important, meaningful situations in my life. So there is something that we'll keep talking about. It's also like a pat on the back whenever you're like frustrated. You could just say there. First thing I'm going to show you that I've been really trying to think about a lot is just pay attention to what you're paying attention to. I feel like with a residency like Penland, you have 3 years, and so you come in with making something and you kind of end trying to make something different or trying to build some new character into your work and into your life and all of this stuff. And so like coming in, sometimes you can be a little burnt out because you've been working so hard to like, make a living and pay rent. I don't pay rent. And also feed yourself. I don't feed myself. And so like having to kind of make that transition, it is this really like kind of dumb idea, but like it is super helpful to kind of start thinking about what are the weird things that you're just influenced by and kind of just trying to pull and mine from that as much as possible. So the first there is the history of myself. That's a weird way of saying that. I'm from a 4th generation tombstone family, so my mom still sells tombstones to this day. So we've been doing it for over 100 years. And one of the important things about that was I actually kind of just lived kind of here after school. So I would go there and kind of listen to people make accommodations for their loved ones. And this was like the first, taking a person's objects or person in itself as an object and putting it somewhere, giving it a place to be. And so it was that there that kind of really spurned some interest for me. And putting objects and materiality in this weird way. And so like this bottom image is like this world that I would like walk through and thinking about how a person then turns into a date, maybe one quote and a picture onto this monument. And that was supposed to be this like depiction of this one person in its life. But then there's this storage unit behind. You can kind of see one little crate back there on the left, container. And that was a storage facility that we used to have. So monthly people would just like fill these things and hold their stuff in. And so it was these other objects that I got to like kind of just like rip through and kind of like dig because some people would just like never pay their thing. So I would just get to like walk through. And I just thought it was really interesting. There's this material that like was very meant a lot to them and keepsakes to people that they held on to forever and forever. But then there was this other world that like just kind of held them forever, but there was never a connection between the two that I think is very important, which is kind of our daily lives. This is just a depiction of me at a very young age, looking at a mock-up. So this is kind of what my family would do, is kind of create these little mock-ups for people and then send them out. So the other thing I'm going to do is kind of show you some images. I don't like talking about myself that long, so I have to put some images in of people that I also draw influence from. So I'm going to show a couple artists along the way of how I've kind of been influenced by people and then how that's made work that I've been curious in. So the first person I'm going to show you is David Mizell. I think he went to graduate school at CCA, but they had photos of these pieces, and there's a bunch of these images on his website. And what I think is so amazing is this weird copper canister, and what you actually find out is these are cremation canisters from a sane asylum in Washington. So he found these things in this little store. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry. And what I find so interesting about these images is that it's like one very specific object that's being altered by the composition of the person within it. So what's happening is the phosphorescence and the oxygen and all that stuff in there is starting to alter and eat away at the copper and changing that color. So each one becomes individual by the material of the person within it. I just think that's so beautiful. So when I was going to grad school, I was kind of interested in the history that was within our own metals culture, and I was trying to find what I would be really curious to like look into, and I found this secondhand shop that I kept going to over and over and over again, and found this thing called silver-plated platters. And what's amazing about the silver-plated platter, and what I was drawn to, is that it's like this thing that has like 3 different creations of history on it. That there's one, it's like taking a historical object and stamping out these kind of patterns and things like that, but doing it at a mass scale. So it was, you know, something handmade back then, but now is being like made by the thousands. And then it's also silver plated, so it's like trying to look more valuable than it is. It's like we'll put a thin layer of silver on it to like make it look valuable, but really it's copper or brass and pot metal underneath. And then the third one is that there's this patina of use from the person who owned it. There's this care or non-care, depending on which way you find it, that I just think is so beautiful, that there's this kind of like notion of who owned it just by what kind of marks were left. So this is the only platter I've never cut up. I still have it on my wall because it's just been washed so many times that the plating is just coming off from care. And so just like the storage facility and the monuments that I was like living with, I kind of like looked at the different histories of metal. So on the left is the Met Museum's kind of like silver collection that they have on display. But at the same time, those objects are never going to be used again. They're kind of something that we get to look at, so they do have a function, but they're never going to be eaten on or, you know, used to kind of drink any kind of fluids out of. But then there's this storage, there's this like second-hand shop on the right that we used to go to in Texas all the time. And these objects are very cheap. There's probably thousands of them, and they're going to get used again and again and again. And I just think that both of them, I want to make sure everybody understands that. I think both of them are very equal in their value. You know, like I don't want one or the other to be more or less important. I just think that they have both weight in kind of how we look at these objects. So I'm going to only show a couple graduate, my like beginning of graduate school stuff. These are some trophies that I was working on when I was in grad school, and I was kind of taking the material that I just showed you and kind of slamming them all together. And so why I started doing this was that the trophy's history actually begins with table serviceware. That was the first gifts of achievement. When somebody retired, you would give them a teapot, you know, say, good, thank you so much for what you've done. Now you get to kick back and relax. And so then I wanted to kind of start putting those two histories together. I wanted to take the tableware imagery and put it back into the imagery that we see it as this kind of competitive thing. And I also kind of discussed that there's kind of a third notion of trophies now, of kind of a participatory trophy, where everybody gets a trophy no matter what. And so the best part of making a show about trophies is that you get to take all of the trophies away. It's pretty amazing. You're just like carrying them out. You're just like, feel really good. So while I was doing this, actually this top left rim up here is the first silver-plated platter that I ever actually worked with. And so I kind of was looking at it very much, and so I wanted to kind of start mining that as much as possible and making my own work out of it, and that's where this kind of comes in. And so what I was doing is I wanted to kind of piece these things back together and kind of take a whole bunch of variations of history and put them right next to each other and show how the different patinas and different marks could look when they're compared to one another. And so I'm low temp. I'm going to give you a little bit of back history of how I'm making these things. So I'm low temp soldering everything. I love high temp soldering for all the metalsmiths in here. It's like my favorite thing to do in this world. So not getting to do it actually really frustrates me. But low temp solder is the best course of action with this stuff. The plating, I'm finding, will not burn off, but the patina will. And then this little pot metal rim down here will burn off as well. So it's a way for me to hold the patina and also the characteristics that were made into it by low temp soldering. So I'm only doing plumber solder at like 400 or 500 degrees. And it's all from the back, so you guys can't see any of my disgusting fill jobs. I really love specimens and kind of thinking about, I was just reading Why We Make Things and Why It Matters. I was just reading that book, and they were talking about how an idea kind of slowly evolved out, that we have all of our like individual ideas of what is supposed to happen, like what our thoughts on the world are, and they kind of fix or alter or change the communal ones, and we have this kind of slow ebb and flow back and forth. And I think the virus or like specimens are that kind of notion of that kind of feeding out and delineating. So that turns into kind of making a whole set of platters that kind of discuss mitosis, which I think this is actually meiosis. I have to do some research. I could be wrong. I'm going to be honest with you. I hate lying, so I'm just going to be honest with you. That is a major faux pas. So what is great about this is that there's 11 different platters in here that are all being married together in some way. And then you're seeing the different values of each one as they kind of pull apart. This is what it looks like beforehand. So I do this all by hand. It's all jeweler saws, hand cut. And it's just like a jigsaw. You just kind of keep passing it back and forth until you kind of finally feel it fits perfectly in. And then low temp solder back. And so when I'm doing that kind of meiosis thing, I just kind of wanted to do some one-off pieces too. So here is a couple specimens. Some of the early utensils. I really love the utensils that are in here because they're a little bit more out of kind of all over the place, and trying to use like kind of those leftover parts from the ones prior. These were just kind of butting up pieces and soldering it, really fast. And then there's kind of some more marriage pieces. And since then I've kept kind of doing this while I've been at Penland. I've done a few more. So here's another one. This was for Haystack for their auction over the summer. Just like a quick piece for them. I'm gonna try to throw in taglines like craft schools, Haystack. And then this was made at Penland. And it was married together. This was the most frustrating one I've ever done. The thing with these things is you get it right, and then when that first solder job starts, you have to really make sure it's in the right spot, or it's going to fight you the whole way through. So this was like a 2 or 3 day event of just soldering. So speaking about specimens, I like to think more about kind of that macro and micro view, and kind of how they can both kind of have similarities even in their view. So the top view is a set of a microscopic view of blood cells. And then the bottom is the tire fields, so leftover tires from us driving around, and just how similar those can be. So this actually, I'm going to show you the newest piece that I've made. So this is a platter of 66 platters all married together into kind of this monstrosity of 6 feet by 8 feet. I should have put the photo in there of like us carrying this out of my studio. It's pretty, it took a car and it took 5 people and a board. It was pretty nuts. And so it was just kind of that idea of like, now like looking at, I was being very quiet with each one of those platters and finding the right pattern that matches the other. And then what does it look like when you just have the mass of that kind of second hand job all being put onto the wall. So the other there. That is a location, and kind of the identity of that location, kind of signifying that. My father, who's here, thank you guys for coming. I told my stepmom I would just talk right at her for 5 minutes. This field was a major influence on me. My dad and I used to drive by it every single time we went to my grandmother's house, and he used to say that this would, be houses someday. And I just was like, how do you know that? Like, what do you mean? You're like saying the future right now. And he's totally right. It became a Barnes and Nobles and a Mimi's Cafe. So my main part of this presentation is just to tell you that my dad knows the future. So talk to him. He just knows it. No, what I think is amazing is Colson Whitehead wrote this short story called Why where we live now, and it's about New York and how there's these different variations of New York going around at all times, and it's each one's version when they first show up at New York. And I just think that's amazing that for me, it's always going to be the fields every time I pass by, but for everybody else, it's going to be this spot right here. And so there can be two different histories all at the same time, and I think that's really amazing that both of them are equal. And some of them won't even care what this place was, but for others, you know, for the farmer, he lived there for, you know, 20, 30 years, you know. And the idea of the pattern and repetition we put on a landscape, you know. So whenever I go hiking, I always think about like how many people have come before. And then we have this like one line where everybody walks down, but then if you walk like 10 feet into the woods, like maybe nobody's been there before, or 2 or 3. It's so nice getting to see like friends of mine, like when you're super nervous. I just saw Sarah just hanging out back there. So that kind of idea of like marcation onto a place kind of played into how I make work too. So what I did was I started looking at this material, and I had printed a little bit before, and I kind of became curious and if it was possible to print this material itself. And so I thankfully had a show with a printmaker, and she was kind enough to like let me see if I could print it with her. And so this is a direct print right off of the platter. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting the rim off and then just inking it like an intaglio print and then printing it onto paper. And that kind of plays back into the when I was working at the cemetery, I would do rubbings of things too. So I'm finally getting that last little image of what relevance it had to the previous owner. So whenever I find one at the secondhand shop, I'll print it right before I start using it for something. I'll show this one quick image. This is as a Northern Californian person, I had to put San Francisco in here. So this is the direct traffic relations of San Francisco daily. And so that kind of idea of what is the landscape that we actually take up rather than like the space that we don't ever use. One quick print from my screen printing days. This is just tire tracks and thinking about that notion, just like the farming images that I showed earlier. And so just like, once you start collecting so many of these objects, you start to see similarities. So I started printing front and back, one, because then you get to kind of see these little names. So this is the family name was actually engraved into the back, and so kind of wanting to depict that as well. And then at the same time, then you find the exact same pattern with the same idea. So it's a women's group from 1935 to 1965 who was putting some sort of award and engraving the names onto the back as well. And I just think that's so amazing that two people kind of had the same idea, but very different variations of what came out. So while I've been doing this, I went to a residency at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft about 5 years ago. I guess that was 5 years ago. And so it was a way for me, I was able to connect with the public really well, and I was trying to find different ways to connect with them, and I started doing a donation project. So if anybody donates a platter to me, then I'll print a single edition for you. And you get the only edition of that print. And then I keep the material to make sculptures. And a lot of the platters that I'll show in the next few slides will be from that. So it's a way for me to collect material and to get to hear the stories about some of the people. So here's a couple examples. This one was pretty amazing. It's from India, and I think it's handmade. And the lady like handed it over to me. When you haven't worked in this imagery before, you're just like super nervous that like you're just gonna mess it up, because I have to like kind of tell them 10 times like, I'm going to destroy this thing. Like, I hope you're okay with this. And they're like, yeah, totally. And you're like, no, but I am. This print just came out really lovely. It was kind of impressive to me that kind of all different patterns and strikes kind of came out of it, like the scribe marks from the artist who actually chiseled this whole thing. So scaffolding too, like how do we build around an object to take care of it? And the kind of the notions of our own living around a thing. So I did this kind of CMYK print of deleting the object and leaving the scaffolding there. And so I'm really interested I'm always drawn to like artists that like take an object that I think we all have like connection to and affiliation to, and then just altering it in some way to make us think about it in a completely different way. And Gordon Matta Clark, I think this piece just chainsawing through a whole building, you know, so simple, but we all have this kind of connection to this, we all live in a home, and having that kind of deletion or cut in between, makes us all feel like we can be right there, even if we never get to see this building in totality. So I kind of made this quick little print, or this cut sculpture of taking out the wreath from the laurel pattern on the right and then soldering it into this wreath pattern. So deciding what I wanted to hold on to and making an object from there. I'm gonna show a couple artists real quick that I just think are awesome. This is Judith Scott. Does anybody know Judith Scott? Yeah, okay. Judith Scott is an international artist, and she is mentally challenged. She passed away about 10 years ago. And she used to work at the Berkeley Art Museum for mentally challenged people. And so these are these like kind of crazy nests that she would just like wrap string with. And they're these amazing forms, but she just like would grab whatever she wanted to like make these things. And they've done x-rays on these things, and there's like wedding rings in them, and like she just would steal stuff. And so I just love this idea that like all of this history is just kind of getting mangled into this one object and kind of like creating this weird bulbous shape, but you can kind of get some semblance of what it meant in certain places. Just think it's awesome. Travis Townsend, he was an artist in residence at Penland for a few years. I just think his wood sculptures, again, taking kind of lost objects and kind of hammering them together into these weird sculptures. I also kind of secretly, like, I'm such a precision nerd of like cutting everything by hand that like getting to do something like that, I'm like jonesing for, and I'm like working towards right now. So, I was trying to do the same, just kind of putting things on top of one another and kind of having them meld into an object. So this is a teapot on the bottom that then I've cut and splayed open, and then marriaged a bunch of silver-plated platters together to kind of create this form, kind of trying to make this like sediment of different histories. Excuse me. A detail. Low temp solder can fill a gap, let me tell you guys. It's pretty amazing. And then thinking about history of an object and its space that it can take up. So these are 6 feet runner of all platters. So this was at one point the biggest thing I'd ever made. It used to live under one of my dad's beds for a long time. And I think just that aura of like, we all have those little tchotchkes that we hold on to forever, and just like how much weight that thing, when you see it, can hold and can kind of light up a room when you have, I've moved a lot of times, and when you finally see that one thing get out of the box and onto its perfect spot, it kind of makes everything feel good. Cornelia Parker, I just want to be her. She runs over things with a steamroller. Like, that is her artistic practice. So these are all steamrolled. And she did a whole brass band once. And what's amazing is like, it just looks like snakeskin, like something has kind of lost its, like something has moved on and kind of kept slithering away. And this is kind of the remnants of whatever history has kind of been kind of squashed out of it. So I wanted to kind of look at objects in a different way too. So these are all teapots that have been cut open like an orange, and you're seeing the inside of the material instead of the outside. And then decked, which decking, if nobody doesn't know, it's just putting cutting an edge that will fit a perfect line so that you kind of have a solid mass. So they're all decked in, it should be able to hold water. Let's say it does. So make-dos are another thing I think a lot about, how people keep an object having meaningful value. You can't tell I'm nervous. So these teapots have all been broken in some way and then kind of added to. So the left has that spigot that somebody's kind of added and riveted on. The one on the right just needed a handle for some reason. And how we affect objects and materials too. So this is a jewelry piece by Bettina Dittelman. Somebody told her that her pieces were too delicate to wear. So she decided to make this piece on the left, which is the piece on the right, and then she just decided to hug somebody really, really hard, and made that part of the piece. And I just think it's like this beautiful, like, grain, like wheat floating in the air that I just think is really beautiful. And so I wanted to kind of show how my own kind of connection with this material has slowly changed over time too. So watching myself kind of let go of some of like the structural pieces that I had been putting in there and letting it kind of waft like a fabric. So this was a 5 foot by 5 foot platter with pattern all on the outside and then kind of negative pieces on the inside, just like a regular platter, but it's kind of falling apart and kind of stringing together, and all of the pieces, trying to kind of create a narrative of what has happened to this thing as it's like hung on the wall over time. Nothing important like, you know, a historical event, just its time through our own nature. Ai Weiwei's piece of dropping a Han Dynasty urn, just like so smart, and also so kind of like frustrating to watch history get lost, but they were also made by the mass thousands of them are still in our lives. So it's like kind of like a drop in the bucket, but also very meaningful to us that it's still around after, I think, 500 years. Buke de Vries, he takes old ceramic pieces. He actually is a ceramicist himself, and crushes some of them and then makes these glass jars. He also takes like the blue china and makes these kind of big scenes by like gluing them all back together. And I just think fragments in general are kind of amazing, that they're kind of a part of a history, that you don't need to know the whole thing, that you get to kind of let your eye figure out the rest of it or wonder what it was instead of actually putting the whole formula together for you. So it's one of my pieces. This was such an awesome event where you're like, you know, last day of grad school, and you're like, you know, last week, and you're trying to put your show together. And this was the last thing I had to make, and I was here for like 3 weeks. I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And so my friend was like, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna figure it out. And I put it on the pedestal, and they're like, I think we figured it out. It was like the best. It was like, I never will have that ever again. You know, so it was just like making some little pins for it and calling it a day. Thinking about fabric in different materials, or kind of taking materials and making them look like or be represented in another way. So this is a piece that I was working on. I'll show you guys the prints a little bit later, where I was doing a new print edition where I was deleting material. And so I was trying to figure out what to do with all that material, and I started making this kind of fabric cloth. So it started off looking like that on the left, and then it's slowly channeled back and forth to make that piece just hang on the wall. Elan Sui's pieces, these are all leftover toppers for like 40s and all kinds of beer bottles and things like that are turned into these kind of colorful cloths. And one of my, probably the second to last piece I just finished, it's 6 feet by 3.5 feet. So that kind of another idea of, right before the one I showed prior, that really big one, I was trying to think of like how to use those plates just very simply and kind of piecing them together, but then wanting to kind of still show that tattered quality. So then I married them, or I pierced them before soldering them all together. Fragments of an object and getting to see the whole object in totality instead of using it of something we use every day. Collections of things. Collections of ourselves, you know, just how much information we can toss onto one object. So as I was cutting up these materials, I was kind of finding these like pot metal rims still, you know, that I hadn't used, and so I started cutting them out and just kind of not knowing what to do with them. And so I started making this kind of circle of history of me using it, and so I was soldering those little pot metal rims over and over and over again on itself to make this kind of rope. Yeah, this was like really fun to work on. It was a super fragile. I actually broke like the day before the reception, and then I had to retrofit it and fix it. Yeah, but it was really great to just kind of understand how one specific image of these platters could kind of relate to each other and kind of create this semblance of a timeline. Jean-Claude and Christo, that fabric on top of an object and not really knowing what it is underneath. Renat Bouzier, he does these kind of installations of just photos into a historical space. So I got really into shadows and kind of the image that an object can cast into our world. And so I started doing these prints. These are additive prints. So the top image is the first print in the edition, and the second one I've added married material into it and then printed again. So what I'm trying to do is watch a pattern kind of slowly disappear. So I'm almost done. It's been like one of the things I've been working on to and fro, like while I've been in the residency, where I just kind of add and marriage and then solder and print and then keep going. And so I'm pretty close to it just being one big rectangle of pattern by the end of it. So it'll be an addition of 7. And the last one is just actually an embossing of the first image up there. So the great thing about going to a craft school is that you just get influenced by so many people up there. And so I'll talk about a few more people, but I just think like I got to like kind of go up to the print shop and become good friends with the print coordinator, Jay Fox, and we just kind of were able to try different things too. You know, and I think that's the beauty of some of these craft schools, is that like many people get to like show up for 2 weeks and just kind of go crazy and experience something, a new technique, a new tradition, a new material, until they've kind of get to walk away. And a lot of people say that like 6 months later is when you finally figure out what you just learned. And so I've got to kind of live there for 3 years, so I'm guessing it's going to be like a year and a half until I like know what's going on. And so like these are just a couple like little quick trials, you know, actually trying color. On the top right, the top left is printing off of it and then double bossing off of that, so you're getting one pattern on top of another pattern, and then relief, and then printing on top of another. So seeing 2 different imageries kind of flow within one another, historical objects. The other great thing about craft schools is you get to collaborate like nobody's business. So the piece on the left is Eileen Wallace, who's at University of Georgia. She's a letterpress person. She has this amazing practice where she just like kind of figured out just complete experimentation on the letterpress machine. So we were able to kind of make these weird shapes. She's got this crazy magnet that goes into the press that you can just like take steel objects and stick them down and they'll just stay there, and you can keep printing over and over again. And so we were able to just like make images really, really fast. And then Jamie Karalik was a core student who's doing these letterpress pieces on the right, and then I was working on doing some like cutting within. So I was putting my own marriage pieces into her patterns as well. I think I just threw this in here because I love them and I think everyone should know about them. These are pinhole cameras of the sun for over a year. So this is the pattern of the sun over one space. So these are the prints that I was talking about earlier. So the top left is the first edition, and then I was slowly cutting and cutting away until I got to nothing. And it was really amazing to see it slowly just get lost, that imagery get lost, and one object seemed to like really tie everything together, especially with this one. These kind of like little big flower pieces, like once they go, it turns into something just very different. So it's kind of fun, like destroying something and seeing when that one object kind of got lost. Lisa Gralnick is one of my grad professors. I just think her thoughts on value of an object is really pertinent. She takes, all of these objects are, the piece on the left is the value of the sink is the faucet on the left in gold. So she did a whole body of work on the gold standard. So she would take the value and then make one part of the object to denote that value. She's done coffee, she did like a gun, she's a heavy smoker, so she did cigarettes. And then the piece on the right is actually where the gold came from. And so these are all bracelets that she found from people on Craigslist and stuff like that. So she did a monument of those objects before casting them. So that idea kind of spurred me into doing my own little makeshift graffitis in and around Penland and Haystack, actually. And so kind of putting in little objects around the school to kind of denote like one little kind of catch your eye moment on these tools. So the part on the left is actually a shingle, a platter shingle. On the right is a letterpress guard. Bottom left is in the jewelry studio. It's the guard for the drill press. And then on the right is the wood shop's push door. And that actually got me into making my own kind of object to be in the gallery as well. And so this is a table leaf, silver-plated table leaf. And what I was in this table show in Richmond, and I've kind of been really curious about the table leaf, like where it's put when it's not in the table leaf, and how it kind of denotes a commemorative act when you put it into the table. But really as a thing, it's just like a piece of wood, you know? And so kind of creating this commemorative object that then lights up and shows kind of that history on the bottom. While I was in Houston, I actually got the opportunity to meet with a historical society and kind of look at their objects and kind of think about, you know, where things are placed and what they mean, where they're placed and things like that. And so I thankfully just asked that question. I was like, hey, do you think I could do this? And they totally said yes, where I said, can I put my objects in your collection just for like a second, just to see what they would look like if they were put in the history that they're actually like being pulled from. And so they said yes, and so what you actually can see is, oh, let's see if this works. Yeah. So this is my piece here, and then back there is one of my pieces. And I'm in no way saying that like my pieces are at all to the accolades that these objects have been held in this historical society, but it's interesting to see those values and those histories and that patterning go back to what it was once, you know, what everybody's been pulling off of. So here's a couple more images. You know, those teapots on the right have, you know, nothing on the one on the left, you know, because of how much craftsmanship and like work that went into this thing. But I like to see them together to see kind of the markations of present and past and see what they say to each other. And kind of the weight of history, you know, how much can kind of take up a museum. You know, they say that typically 30% of a museum's collection is on display at any time. There's 70% more just like sitting there, you know, just hanging out. And I would love to see all of that stuff. And to the same effect, as I'm cutting, I'm getting this humongous mound behind me of material that I haven't used yet, that I'm working on using. But there's this other history that I've kind of let go as I've been working in this stuff. So at Penland, I think that is the craft school experience, is those two things kind of like interacting with each other, is like people making possessions and objects that they hope will go off into the world, but in this space where there's so many people just coming and going and doing the same thing over and over again. And I think it's this amazing thing where like there's this history, so many similar histories all kind of putting a little nuance or a little spin on each one of the little moments as they're up there, kind of making one big value for this thing. And I wanted to kind of show these guys that I actually get to hang out with these guys every single day for 3 years. Even the dogs. I mean, Albie is just adorable. How can you not? And so like, it's really amazing as being a resident at these craft schools, is that you get to kind of see different variations on a theme. You know, that Seth is a blacksmith and tool maker. I'll click over. Piece on the top right. So we're both metalsmiths, but he's doing it in this completely different way and is looking at something, a different history in a different way. And I'm so happy that he's there and doing it, because there's so many things to think about that none of us can hit all of the bases at the same time. And I'm just going to name off these amazing people up here. Andrew Hayes on the top left is a steel sculptor and bookmaker. Annie Evelyn right next to him is a furniture maker, but does this amazing reticulated upholstery. So that's aluminum that can upholster, that can reticulate on the top. Tom Yazchuk is a potter. Seth Gould, who I just spoke of. Dean Allison is the glass caster at the bottom left. Mercedes Jolnick, which if you guys all have a Penland catalog, you guys can see even more of her imagery. And then bottom right is Maggie Finlayson. So we have 8 amazing people up there just doing interesting things. And so it's this like vibration of all those people together that I think, as I'm kind of drawing a close on this presentation, I'm doing great. And this residency, see what I did there? Tied it all up. I'm just kind of seeing like, you know, how you start a timeline thinking it's going to be one thing and how it ends up being exactly what you needed, but a completely other thing. And I think that's what objects do for us. And I think what's interesting about the thing I still can't say perfectly is that like we're all kind of, I'm going to say this really rude thing, but I think we're all material too, you know, and all of our ideas are material. You know, we all have these neurons that are kind of holding all of these ideas that are super important to us, and they can fail and they can change just as much as what we think is going to happen can happen. And so this is kind of the view of Penland that I get to see all the time when you go up to school. And so I think that history, just watching, hopefully creating a shadow of some sort. I don't mean to make any kind of rudeness to this image. I think it's lovely. This is actually from the Hiroshima bomb being dropped, and kind of the image of somebody's shadow being cast. Just kind of that beauty, and also such frustration and pain. And kind of the both images of that. And I think the last couple images I'll show you are the last piece. The last image is at the, oh man, I'm gonna blank. It's in New York. Storm King, thank you. Thank you, brain. And so this is a kind of a set of wreaths that I just finished in the last 6 months, a year. And they're kind of this kind of transition of the object being there, that wreath being there, but through the whole image. The embossing stays there, but the wreath disappears. Thank you.